Here are the best MLB players from each decade. Starting with the 1900s, Cy Young. He dominated the league with 230 wins to 146 losses throughout the decade, while having a 2.12 ERA. And let's not forget, bro literally has an award named after him that goes to the best pitcher in each league. While he's impressive, he's not as impressive as the best player from the 1910s, Ty Cobb. Cobb is a baseball legend that has a really good movie about him. I suggest that you watch it. He hit to an average of 397 throughout the whole decade, which is absolutely insane. He may be insanely famous, but not as famous as the best player from the 1920s, Babe Ruth. The Babe is by far the most famous baseball player of all time. In fact, after World War II, he went to Japan to calm down relations because the Japanese people loved him that much. Ruth hit 467 home runs in the decade and drove in 1,335 runs. An astonishing total. While Ruth was known for a lot of good reasons, the best player of the 1930s is known today for more sad reasons, Lou Gehrig. Gehrig is most famous for his disease ALS that causes pain and sadness to families all around the world. While he met a sad end, Gehrig was an amazing baseball player through the decade, hitting for an average of 343 while hitting 347 home runs. Mans was a stud. While Gehrig was not a top 10 player of all time, the best player of the 1940s is arguably the best player to ever exist, Ted Williams. Williams was a monster throughout his career and even better throughout the decade, getting 1,303 hits in the 40s and has one of the most insane and famous catches of all time. While not the best player of all time, the best player of the 50s is sure up there, Mickey Mantle. Mantle was a great player throughout the decade, getting almost 1,400 hits and hitting 280 homers. He's an iconic Yankee that is easily a top 10 player of all time. While Mantle was very influential for the game of baseball, he wasn't as influential as the best player from the 60s, Hank Aaron. Aaron was one of the first African American superstars in MLB. While players like Jackie Robinson paved the way for him, he took it and ran with it, being arguably a top 3 player of all time. He hit 375 home runs throughout the decade while getting 1,107 RBIs. He also had one of the most iconic fan interactions when fans swarmed the field after he beat the home run record. While not being anywhere as influential, the best player of the 70s was still a stud, Johnny Bench. Bench is the best catcher of all time. Johnny Bench is the best catcher of all time. Yeah, you heard me. I've used the words arguably a lot in this video, but you can't argue that there's a catcher better than Bench. In the 70s, he had almost 1,400 hits and hit 290 home runs. Production like that just doesn't come from catchers, making him by far the best at his position. While not being the best at his position, the best player of the 80s was still an iconic player, Rickey Henderson. Henderson was a speed demon on the bases, stealing 130 bases in a single season, while also hitting 137 home runs throughout the decade. Dude was an insane dual threat. While Henderson was an insanely popular player, he wasn't anywhere near as popular as the best player of the 90s, Ken Griffey Jr. Griffey is a living legend and made baseball cool in the 90s. He hit almost 400 home runs throughout the decade while having a .302 batting average. Not only is he the coolest baseball player to ever exist, he's one of the most popular. While Griffey was famous, the best player of the 2000s is infamous, Barry Bonds. Bonds is of course known for taking steroids, but even so, the pure amount of home runs he hit was insane. He still holds the home run record today, hitting 762 in his career and also hitting 73 in one season, both records still not beaten. While Bonds is hated by most MLB fans, the best player of the 2010s is loved, Mike Trout. Trout is an amazingly talented player, winning 3 MVPs this decade and cementing himself as a top 10 player of all time, hitting 298 home runs throughout the decade. Trout's former teammate finishes off our list as the best player of the 2020s, Shohei Ohtani. While this decade isn't over yet, Ohtani is definitely the best player of the decade so far, and is insanely popular, bringing millions of Japanese eyes to MLB due to his success.